Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, in our ongoing study in The Bondage of the Will by Martin Luther, dated 1525. We're going to look at the Recall Triad for the very first lesson, pages 3 to 18, and we're going to look at just a focused recap of what that lesson gave us. And we'll begin by taking a look at Block 1 and look at the methodology that is outlined by Luther. He tells us Christian doctrine must follow the rule of Paul by being ready to correct, to rebuke, and to summon. And he uses 2 Timothy 4:2. And obviously, the correction, the rebuke, and the summoning means he's going to be correcting the position of Erasmus. He's going to be rebuking the position of Erasmus. 2, Christian doctrine demands an adherence to Scripture. Luther felt like Erasmus twisted the meaning of Scripture. And then 3, Christian doctrine should have a tone of apologetics. It should have a tone of apologetics. Even though it's Christian doctrine, it should have a tone of apologetics. He gets that from 1 Peter. Now, second, in Block 2, Christian doctrine must be an apocalyptic unveiling of Christ's truth. He says Christ has opened our understanding to the Scriptures. And that's from Luke 24. And critical to Luther's work on Christian doctrine, the past heresy of Arius of 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea, that heresy must be negated because the Council of Nicaea concluded that Christ is co-substantial and co-eternal with the Father. And all Christian doctrine perceives Christ as co-substantial and co-eternal with the Father. And then 3, the work of the Spirit is necessary for our understanding of the Scriptures and for our forming of any Christian doctrine. So the ongoing work of the Parakletos, the Spirit as advocate, is needed to shape and form all Christian doctrine. And that leads to his first affirmative statement in Block 3 on positing the sovereignty of God that will underlie his doctrine of fallen free will. The Christian doctrine of human nature and the Christian doctrine of human will must first posit that all are subordinate to the will of God. God's will is immutable. He says that many times. Luther does. It's unchanging with regard to his nature. What is God's nature? It is a nature of agape self-giving. Because of God's irresistible will, we can depend on his promises and his help and the help of the Spirit when shaping Christian doctrine. So it gives us a Scripture-based methodology, and we know that Luther, he mentioned it many times in his manuscript. Luther always said, Christian doctrine is based on the infallible word of Scripture and sound, good conscience. He really holds up conscience because he believes that our conscience is being indwelt by the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Christ. So sound Christian doctrine demands both of those. It demands a solid basis in the infallible word of Scripture and the work of good sound conscience. So that gives us a methodology. It's a Scripture-based methodology. And then it's going to be an unveiling of, if necessary, an unveiling of continued heresy by the Catholic Church with Erasmus holding to what Luther considered a Pelagian or semi-Pelagian heresy by positing the free will of man and a works righteousness. So Luther says his presentation will unveil any heresies. He mentions Arius of 325, but he will be mentioning, we already know, he will be mentioning the Pelagian heresy. Definitely, he considered Erasmus as a continuing fragment of Pelagian heresy. And then the sovereignty in God, we know that's the foundational truth for this book by Luther. Free will is a concept for God only. Free will is a divine concept. Free will is not a human concept. It's not even in the realm of humanity. Free will is a divine concept. That's Luther's fundamental, foundational presupposition. And just so we can reshape the environment again, let's take a look at the early church history at the bottom. It's good to remind us as we go about the church history surrounding Luther. 325 was the Council of Nicaea that put down the heresy of Arius, because Athanasius led that decision, and they posited that Christ is co-eternal, Christ is co-substantial with the Father. Arius denied that. The Council of Nicaea called Arius and Arianism heresy. Now, in 412 AD, at the Council of Carthage, that's when Pelagius denied the fallen nature of man. And at the Council of Carthage, Augustine countered, and they decided in favor of Augustine. There is a doctrine of fallen nature of mankind. There is a doctrine of original sin. Pelagius said no. They condemned Pelagianism in 412 AD. However, the Pope stepped in 412 AD. Pope Zosimus, he condemned the Council of Carthage. And he said the Catholic Church is going to side with Pelagius. We're going to not believe in the fallen human will of man. And that's the environment that led up to Martin Luther. And in 1524, Erasmus published Diatribe on Free Will. In 1525, Luther published Bondage of the Will. And it was a debate between synergistic doctrine and monergistic doctrine. Synergistic doctrine says we work together with God to achieve salvation. Monergistic doctrine, Luther, says God alone and by God's grace alone do we receive salvation. We do not work with God to acquire salvation. It is by grace, and God alone deserves all of the glory. However, just 20 years later, in 1545, Pope Paul III again denied the fallen human will, denied the consequence of original sin. Then we had Pelagian heresy all over again. But it was a semi-Pelagian view of Arminius, and so in 1618 the Council of Dort convened and condemned Arminianism, which was semi-Pelagian heresy, and that's when birth was given to five-point Reformed theology, which we now call it five-point Calvinism. So we get a great recall triad here. At the very beginning of the book, we learn Luther's methodology. It's going to be scripture-based. We learn Luther's intention to unveil heresy if necessary. And we understand Luther's foundational posited statement that above all else, his doctrine will be undergirded by the foundation of the sovereignty of God. So he gives us extremely strong information right at the beginning of the book to prepare us for a very determined and very powerful presentation. So that's going to wrap up this recall triad for pages 3 to 18.